going to go ahead and begin. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is our first night in a series of classes as we enter into canning season for 2021. 2020 exploded with canning. As many of you who attempted last year knew, there were no cans to be found anywhere, or jars. So welcome. I'm so excited you're on here tonight. Linda, we've got Diana from Sevierville, which is great. I'm Mary Beth Lima. I am the Family and Consumer Science Extension Agent in Blount County. And we have Linda Hyder here, who is from Sevier County. She's also a Family and Consumer Science Extension Agent with UT. So we are here. I like to think of us as, she may not think so, but as the canning gurus. And we are your experts. And if we don't know the answer, we have specialists at UT that will get us the answer for you. I encourage you to use the chat box tonight, particularly if you have a question. So I'll be monitoring the chat box, and if you have any questions, when there's an opportunity, I will be sure to ask those questions out loud, and let's see what we can answer. So we're going a little out of order for those of you who registered. We're going to be doing this once a month for the next 4 months. And we're going to really touch on the basics of canning. And I say we're going out of order because for those of you first-time canners, tonight is specifically on pressure canning, which I know in Blount County, we have not had a training on pressure canning in several years. So it's a very, very important part of canning. However, this is not our very beginners canning class. We're actually going to do that next month for jams and jellies. And so all of you guys have signed up, you're registered, and you'll get the link just like tonight, an hour before, for next month's jams and jellies, where we will be actually canning live. So this tonight is on pressure canning, and pressure canning takes a long time. We have to have lots of patience and a good book when it comes to pressure canning because it takes a long time. So tonight, we do not have the ability to can live. And so Linda Hyder was phenomenal, and she has put together some videos that we'll be able to watch tonight so you can see the process done on canning. And of course, we're here live answering questions for you as well. The other 3 cannings throughout our season, our canning series, we will be canning live. So I know I'll be doing a jams and jelly. The next one will be tomatoes. I probably will do diced tomatoes. I might do a salsa. I'm not sure. In fact, when we get to a poll, I might ask you what you want. And then our final series will be on pickling, and I can't decide if I'm going to do a dill or a sweet and sour pickle, but those will be live. So I encourage you, in addition to tonight, to attend all the other series as well. I try to do it during times that the vegetables or fruits are in season, except for, of course, tonight. We wanted to, again, get pressure canning done in the beginning because it's important that we get our lids tested, and getting ourselves prepared for the canning season, I felt, pressure canning was important. So with that said, we're going to ask you a couple of questions in the chat box. Can you guys go ahead and mention what is either your favorite vegetable to can, or what vegetable are you most interested in canning? So go ahead and put in the chat box.
And if you've never used the chat box, just say something out loud and we'll show you where it is. It's on the very bottom. It says chat. So you just click on that and type.
There you go. We got green beans. Okay. So the question again is, what is your favorite vegetable to can, or what vegetable are you most interested in learning how to can? Green beans, green beans. We love those green beans. We got tomatoes. Pickles and tomatoes, great. Pickles that are, welcome to the question of the century.
Yes.
Pickles that are not mushy, I know. I'm gonna lean towards doing the sweet and sour. sweet and sour pickle that I do is actually reduced in sugar, and it tends to be a really crisp pickle. My dill, not so much. It's hard to get a crispy pickle when you're canning. More tomatoes and pickles. Great, great. All right, Michelle, welcome. You know, there's about 50% of you who have never canned before on this call tonight. Okay, so pickled carrots, pickles, tomatoes, Brussels sprouts, beets, and carrots. That's great. Fantastic. Fantastic. And those of you who, again, that are on here that have never canned before, please don't let pressure canning overwhelm you. There are two types of pressure canning, and Linda's going to get into that. And I would start, honest to goodness, I'm telling you right up front, I would start with jams and jellies. Those tend to be your most simple, least amount of time. That's water bath, not a pressure canner, which we're talking about tonight. Things are a little bit more easier when it comes to water bath canning. Tonight's a great night for you just to listen in, but don't let it turn you away if you get a little nervous with pressure canning. Water bath canning is so much easier. So definitely tune in to all of our other classes, because all the other classes are water bath, which are a lot easier. So you're taking the difficult class first. All right. I also have a poll for you. We're going to try this out. Like I said, about 50% of you have never canned before. I am sending a poll. Go ahead and answer the question. Let's see if I'm right. Right now, we're about 50-50. Yeah. We've got two more people. Let's see. Yeah, there we are. Okay, just about everybody has answered. I was under. 67% of you have never canned before. 30% have. I'm going to write that down real quick. 67%. Okay, so that is great to know. So like I said before, just remember that pressure canning is very important to learn about. It's a very serious form of canning. We do have some major precautions to take care of. Please do not allow pressure canning to get you nervous. This is definitely not the class to ease your worries, or maybe it is, because pressure canning has a lot of rules and regulations. So if you're really getting into it, stay tuned to our other classes, because those are super, super fun. And of course, we're always here to answer any questions. So if you do decide to pressure can or you have any questions, give us a call, email us. We're here to answer and help you and guide you through it. All right, with that said, are we ready, Linda?
I think so. I hope so.
All right, take it away.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you, Mary Beth, and welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. Welcome to my well-lit office here in Sevier County. That's where I'm doing this from. We are excited that you're a part of this. I'm going to say this is one of my first, to be honest with you, as far as with technology and videos and all that. So I really appreciate Mary Beth helping me. We have been doing Zoom. I've done quite a few of those, but this is kind of a different way that I've taught pressure canning before. So my goal is to make it seem like it's not so hard, but I have to agree with Mary Beth. It is a little more difficult. It takes a little bit more time, but it's really necessary if you're going to can vegetables. And I'm talk about that just a little bit more. Just kind of taking it, we could ask you all kinds of questions. I'd kind of like to know how many of you have a garden, or how many of you actually go to the farmer's market and buy a bunch. We all have different ways. And like Mary Beth said, last year, we really saw a huge increase in canning. And by the way, you may want to go ahead and start purchasing canning equipment now. Check and see what you've got and what you need. I even ordered something from Amazon. They only had 18 of them left. So hopefully they'll be getting more. So now's a good time to start. Think about what you want to can, first of all. Also, think about how much do you typically eat within a year. It's best to kind of plan your canning around that figure. You don't want to do so many jars that you're not able to eat them all, but maybe you want to do more to share with someone. But think about your family and where you're going to store them. Do you have a place to store your canned items, and kind of what you want to do? As far as vegetables, when you're canning vegetables, generally it's best to get them at their peak quality and, bring them in and try to harvest them or preserve them, whether it's pressure canning or hot water bath canning, within 6 to 12 hours after harvesting your produce. I know sometimes that's difficult, particularly if you're working and we don't have time, but you want to get to it as soon as you can. If you can't get to it right away, obviously put it in the refrigerator so you can get to it maybe the next morning. You want to make sure that, when you're canning is not going to improve the quality. So you want to look for your vegetables that are at good quality. If they're overripe, definitely canning is not going to help that. So be kind of careful and keep on the lookout for what you're actually preserving. Obviously, there's canning that can preserve food. There's also freezing and drying. But we are going to focus, as you know, on the canning process. Okay. One thing that I'm going to share from the get-go, and I know Mary Beth will approve of this. We are through the University of Tennessee Extension. All the information we share is research-based. And that's very important with canning. Whatever type you're using, make sure you have a resource-based source. A great one that we use is so easy to preserve. I may let Mary Beth put in the chat box. The National Food Preservation Center, National Center for Home Food Preservation. I'm glad she's going to type it in. It's from University of Georgia. It is excellent. UT Extension actually has a canning book. You can go online and receive that, get that through email, or we can actually get you a paper copy. If you need that, you can come by our office and pick up one. Just let us know. And of course, we always trust Ball. Ball is a trustworthy publication too. This is probably a few years old, but make sure that your recipe you're using is research-based. If you have any canning books that are written prior to 1994, research says just toss them, throw them away. If it's your mother's keepsake, maybe keep it on the shelf, but don't use them, because canning has changed through the years. We want to make sure we use current information.
And Linda, I'm going to put in the chat box freshpreserving.com. This is Ball's website for those of you who are tech savvy. You could go to this link, and all of these areas are where you can get hundreds of tested recipes.
Thank you, Mary Beth. And I've told Mary Beth just to pitch in anytime I'm missing something. So that's a good thing. Let me just start off by saying pressure canning is important if you're going to can vegetables. That is used for canning vegetables. Pressure canning is also necessary for canning meats and stews and soups. So any type of seafood also. So it's very important that canning is done through the pressure canning for vegetables, soups, and your meats. Okay. The reason for that, and I'm gonna share my screen here in just a minute, is because of the acidity. Let me kind of back up a minute. Obviously, when we preserve foods, what type of preserving we use, we want to make sure that we take care of those microorganisms in the food to prevent them from growing so the food will be spoiled. Or, we want to preserve the food. We want to make sure we get rid of any organisms that maybe would be unhealthy for us. So there's one particular microorganism. Let me try to share my screen. Here we go. Have I got it? Is it on, Mary Beth?
You're good.
Good. This is called Clostridium botulinum. It is actually a bacteria that is found in food. We eat food, it doesn't bother us because, it's just oxygen's all around us and we're enjoying our food. But when we get to canning foods, the process there is actually taking air out of a jar, whether it's water bath canning that Mary Beth and I will be doing, or if it's pressure canning, you're taking air out of the jar, sealing that jar to keep any type of microorganisms or air getting back into that jar, okay? So this particular bacteria, though, actually forms a spore, okay? And that spore can live in an area with no oxygen. It can still grow. And that particular spore produces a toxin that causes what we call, you can tell from the name, botulism, which can be very harmful to our health. It can even be fatal. So we don't want botulism from our canned foods that we home can. What prevents that? Number one, is the type of food. Fruits, pickles, jellies, and jams. A lot of those are what we consider high acid foods, or like pickles, they have vinegar added to them, things like that. So that high acid prevents that particular bacteria from producing that botulism, okay? We still have to go through the process of canning. We still have to add heat and get the air out of the jar, the water bath canning that Mary Beth will be doing. And there's research behind that as to how long you should water bath them and all that. But the foods that we consider low acid are our vegetables, our stews, our soups, our meats. Those are considered low acid. Okay. And if we don't take care of that botulism while we're canning, then it could be dangerous. You hear about cases of food poisoning or botulism, and you think, that was probably way back in the 20s. And Mary Beth's going to show you a really good slideshow next time that's going to show about a family years ago that they didn't can correctly. But I was looking at some statistics, and there still is botulism caused from home foods preserved incorrectly. I remembered one back in 2015. This lady made, she went to a potluck supper at church, and she made potato salad. And the potatoes were not canned properly. 20 people actually received, from eating that, actually had botulism. 20 cases were reported. Unfortunately, one lady that was 54 years of age passed away from that. So I'm telling you that y'all are going to be nervous at potlucks now. But, be careful. Make sure you can with research-based information, okay? And with that said, if someone gives you a can of home canned foods, ask how it was canned. Kind of look at it. You've got to be your judge of that. Do you want to say anything about that, Mary Beth? About gifts, home canned or anything?
We have to be really, really careful, if particularly when it's low acid foods, such as vegetables. And so when you are given a gift of canned green beans, the most important is that you boil it for 10 minutes. All of your vegetables have to be boiled for 10 minutes prior to consuming after you open it. But most important, if you do get it as a gift, your high sugar, your high vinegar, water bath canned items, you still have to take precautions. Like Linda said, there is evidence that says, yes, you can still get botulism in these. So you still have to take precautions, but not as severe as your pressure canned goods. You definitely want to protect yourself, particularly because botulism has no taste, no smell, no visual. It doesn't give off a gas that you can see. So you don't know if it's in there. So you definitely want to just be careful when someone gives you a gift. If you've done it, you know that you've done it correctly. And so you can relax a tad, but again, all of your vegetables that you still need to boil for 10 minutes.
Yeah, boil for 10 minutes. Yes. Okay. Thank you, Mary Beth. And I don't mean to scare y'all with that, but if you follow research-based recipes, you should be safe if you follow, the procedures there. And you may have friends that that they follow procedures. So, it's good.
No great-great-grandma recipe from 100 years ago.
Exactly.
Every time I say this and we talk about this, I always feel like I'm the canning police. I'm sorry.
I do too.
Sorry to disappoint you.
I feel like nobody's going to share their home canned goods, but no, we don't mean that.
But canning is a lot of fun, and it feels so good when you have a beautiful, bountiful garden, and then you can go and can it and fill your cabinets with jars for, you know, the whole year. So it is worth it. I think the time, the energy, I think it's worth it. Absolutely. And it is an art. So
I totally agree. And a lot of people enjoy doing this, and I do too. Think about entering your entry at the county fair. How fun. And also people on special diets, you know what's in that food, and that's a real big plus. And we don't have to depend on, you know, processed or canned and all that stuff, the salt and the canned goods and all. So canning is a wonderful thing. Okay, but continuing on, this just kind of shows a little chart here. You see the hot water bath, which Mary Beth will be doing. It's when the water boils at 212 degrees and through the processing there. And because they're high acid and following the hot water bath recipe, we don't have to worry about botulism if it's, you know, like I say, research-based recipe. Now, as far as killing that botulism, those spores in our low acid foods, we have to use a pressure canner because it has to get to 240 degrees. If you kept it at boiling water temperature, 212, it will not kill those spores, that botulism. So the canner has to reach 240 degrees for our vegetables, our low acid foods, okay? So we have the processing time is very important. And a lot of thought, a lot of research went into those recipes that we're using. And number one, it says the time it takes to reach the desired pressure. When you think about processing, about canning, you've got to make sure that you have time to do that, especially with depends on what you're canning though, but you've got to allow time to do it. It's not just a quick process. So think about that with your schedule. Do you have everything laid out and just ready to go? Because a lot of research went into the size of the jar, the amount of vegetables that went in there, the time it takes for the canner to actually reach a certain temperature, the processing time, and also how much time it took for the pressure to go down. So that's why we never want to change a recipe or reduce the time of processing or try to hurry up and cool it off. We've got to let things just stand as written because that's important as far as the safety and the processing and the quality of what we're canning. So kind of make sure you're real familiar with your recipe before you get into the actual canning process to make sure you've got what you need and you've got the time allowed to do it. And this is a great idea too. I mean, you may have grown up helping your parents or your grandparents can. I know I did too. So it can be a good family time too. So especially when you enjoy what's left afterwards. Okay.
I want to chime in a bit.
Sure.
When it comes to those tested recipes, and not, we have to use tested recipes. We have to keep our amounts the same. We can't really change things. There are hundreds of recipes that you can pick and choose from. Most of the time, if there's a particular recipe that you want to can, that was great Uncle so-and-so's, you probably can find a recipe that's very similar. Because a lot of people say, well, that's taking all the fun out of it, right? However, what you can do is find a recipe that you like, and the art part of it is if you are making a soup or you are making, let's say, salsa, it may call for, a cup of peppers. Well, you can pick whatever kind of pepper you want. So you can go with a green pepper and make it extremely mild, or you can go with a hot jalapeno, whatever kind of pepper you want. Or if it calls for an onion, you can choose whichever kind of onion you want to use. So that gives you a little bit of flexibility as far as experimenting a little bit in flavor, but you can't change the amounts or the type of food. The consistency has to stay the same.
Right, and the processing time and all that would stay the same too. Very good point. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to show you some pressure canners, but how many of you, I can't really see your picture, maybe put in the chat box, how many of you have Let me just change the question. Do any of you have a canner that looks like this? If you do, say you can chat in yes. Mary Beth, you want to report to me what you're finding out, maybe, if any of them have them? This is definitely an old pressure canner. Before the 1970s, we saw, I guess, more like this. Notice it's just, you can tell by looking at it, it's a heavy canner. And I've actually tested some canners like this. And you may have one that your family has purchased years ago and it's still in the family. You know, to be honest, they may or may not work. We're going to talk about the dial gauge that the arrow is pointing to is very old. We can actually test that at the UT Extension office and see if it's accurate. But sometimes, since this one's so heavy, the newer ones are much thinner walled. This is a very heavy one. Because it's so thick, it may take a little bit longer for the pressure to build because it's so thick. It may take a little bit longer for the pressure to go down. So the time may be involved a little bit more. Also, let's say we don't know the model number, we don't know what brand, and if we have to take apart to get fixed, we're not going to have any information. So, you know, I would really be careful. I know some people will go to yard sales and buy pressure canners. I've had that happen, and they come back and they had to replace something, but we didn't know really what brand or anything like that. So we didn't have any kind of book to go with it. So kind of be very careful about that. I'm not saying it's not going to work. It still may work fine, but just be cautious about that when you're buying old pressure canners. You may have to, you know, if you knew the manufacturer, maybe you could find information. But definitely pressure canners have changed through the years, and a lot easier and a lot safer, I think, to use. So anybody say they had one like this, Mary Beth?
So yes, and we have a couple of questions as well.
Okay.
So yeah, one person said, no, they don't, but it looks like the one their mom used decades ago, and it frightened them as a kid.
Yes.
Yeah, I could see why. There is one person who has one that looks like it, but they're scared and nervous to use it. It was
Sure. And it's heavy.
Their grandmother's pressure canner.
Okay. Was there a question too?
Is that safe to use?
That particular one, I don't know. We'd have to actually test the pressure dial gauge, and I'll be talking about that. But to be honest, it sure is a lot harder to use because it had those clamps on it, and you had to clamp them all in, and it's a lot harder. I've never used one, but just looking at it, you can imagine. So
we have a couple more
I saw that at a yard sale. I would not buy one just because of the weight and not sure if it's going to work. And it's just, they're much better now. Yes, comment? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so this is going back to talking about recipes. Someone had asked, do you have sugar-free or salt-free canning recipes?
Salt is not needed for canning vegetables. It has nothing to do with preserving. So you don't even have to use salt. If you do use salt, you need to use a canning salt because iodine salt, regular salt will make the liquid look cloudy in your vegetables, but you don't have to use salt at all, no. And I don't really know of any recipes using sugar with vegetables, but there are sugar-free. I know Mary Beth will probably get into that with her. There are some recipes like with jams and jellies you can use. Like Splenda, they have some recipes of their own. But yeah, we can do low sugar recipes too. So we just have to find it. But yeah, there's options out there.
There are some low sodium pickles too. But the salt is part of the pickling process. Actually, the pickle I call sweet and sour, which tastes just like a sweet and sour pickle, is the so easy to preserve low sodium dill pickle. I don't know why they call it that because it's not a dill. It tastes like a sweet and sour, but that's what they consider their low sodium. So yes, to answer your questions, there are definitely low sugar, reduced sugar, sugar-free, and SaltFree Recipes. Another question that they had is, and Linda, I'm going to answer this question. What is the difference between an old recipe and a newer one? Well, the problem with old recipes is we don't know if it's ever been tested. The newer recipes, and we may not have a slide today on this, but we definitely have one in jams and jellies. What happens is when the recipe goes through the testing facility and the testing center, what is happening is they have the jar, and those of you who can see me, I'm using my hands to kind of demonstrate, but they have the jar, and the lid has a special piece in it that has a thermometer that goes right down the center of the jar. And the goal is to make sure that the center of the jar gets to a specific temperature for a specific amount of time. And that's how we guarantee that the bacteria has been killed inside. And that's during processing, when we submerge our jars into water, whether it's water bath or pressure canning, and we process it for a certain amount of time. But so we want to make sure that the recipe you're using has been through that testing. So any up-to-date ball recipe, you want to, every couple of years, get a newer ball book, a new ball book, freshpreserving.com, or going on to So Easy to Preserve, looking in your So Easy to Preserve book. Those have all been tested. Linda, do you know, is there like an estimated time frame, if you have an old ball book or something like that, that you would say probably it's time to update?
What I saw was anything printed before 1994.
Okay.
So, and with that thought, things have changed. For example, now it is not recommended to can squash or pumpkin. That is not safe. You can do cubed if they're like an inch cubed, but do not puree or mash squash or pumpkin or zucchini squash, because the density and the pulp is so thick, and that could vary. It's just hard for the heat to penetrate while it's processing to make that safe. So USDA recommends not to do that anymore. That also includes your pumpkin butters, because that's mashed or pureed. So that's not recommended to be home canned. Now, commercially, you'll see that, but they have things that we don't have in our kitchen that we can use. So, but yeah, that's just an example, because years ago they said you could can squash that way, but no, not anymore. Now you need to freeze your squash. Like if you want, puree it or mash it for casseroles or whatever, it's best to freeze it. Good point. All right. Any other questions?
We're good.
All right.
We just got one slid in right at the end. What about potatoes?
Potatoes can be canned. I will find you a recipe, but I'll be honest, it takes a while. So I'll have to look in my book to share that with you. But yes, they can. It takes a long time. And I'll try to find that at the end here before we leave. Good questions. Keep them coming. Okay. Let me go to very quickly. This is just a diagram of the two different types of canners, but I'd rather show you that in person. So let me go back to me. Let's see. I got to get out of this. I want to stop sharing. Okay, now you can see me. I have it behind me here, and I have two canners. I have a pressure canner with a dial gauge. You can't see it. There's another one over here that's a weighted gauge. Those are the two kinds of pressure canners, a dial gauge and a weighted gauge. As you can see, this one has the dial gauge. And if you can't see, let Mary Beth know. It has numbers on it, and that's how we read the pressure. It also has a little safety plug here that's black. It's a little, this is hard to do. This is technology. Little rubber plug here, and that's like a safety plug. If the pressure did get too high, it would pop off. And we also have a vent here. The steam will be coming out. Sorry, right here. And also we have what's called a vent lock, and you probably can't see it. You'll see it in my videos, but this thing actually comes up. You see it there?
Yeah, you see it. Mm-hmm.
When the pressure is reached within the canner. Okay, so and it goes down when there's no more pressure. We'll show that later. The other canner is the weighted canner, weighted gauge. We cannot test these because they're weights. They're pretty standard. What happens with this one when pressure is reached, you're going to hear it jiggle. And maybe you grew up with somebody that had a jiggler, is what I call it. And they'll just continuously jiggle when the pressure is reached. Now, how do you know how many pounds pressure? You don't have a dial to read it. It has these little weights. Like this weight that's on here now is 5 pounds. If I put another weight, it's just like a ring. And it's another 5 pounds. That's like 10 pounds of pressure. Okay. And that's what you put on to cover this, the port here, the steam. I'm looking at my little picture. I need to go in the middle, right, Mary Beth? Sorry.
You see what you're doing. Yeah.
Okay, this is good. Okay. So there again, that is called the weighted gauge. It's a weight. It covers your steam. It has some of the same features, the vent lock and that safety plug. See how much lighter this is than that big old heavy weight? And you just put it on and place it on top of your canner, okay? So make sure if you're buying a canner that it has the UL on it, the Underwriter's Laboratory printed on it too, for safety. There is some talk about the gaskets. They used to say you should put vegetable oil on it every year. With the older ones, that may be true, but with the newer ones, that's not recommended. Always read your manufacturer's instruction book to see what they recommend. You don't really need to mess with this rubber gasket unless it's really dry or it's falling off. If it's in good shape, leave it alone. You want to make sure that when you store your canner, everything's really dry. You don't want to put it in damp. But these gaskets can be replaced too. There again, it's important to know, your manufacturer and all that. Okay.
Linda, there has been something that had come up in the chat box. What are your thoughts, or what do you know about a digital gauge?
I have not seen a digital gauge.
Could you share with us a little bit? Because I have not heard of a digital gauge either. Unless it's is it a multi-cooker?
Could be.
Let's see. Oh, there she is. I can see your video too if you wanted to share with us.
Who, me?
Oh, okay. So was it a dial gauge that has the dial, or did it have that weight piece without the numbers? Not a dial. Okay, so you have a weighted gauge. Anyone else can chime in the chat box. Let us know what you have. Do you have a dial gauge, or do you have a weighted gauge? If you have one, let us know. So the one that she's holding, Christine, the one she's holding up, is that the weighted gauge? Is that what you have? She might have gone off to go find it. I see she's not on the screen. We'll ask her when she gets back. But everyone else, if you can, share what you have. Do you have a weighted or a dial gauge?
This is a weighted. This is the dial.
There you go. She's back. Dial gauge. Okay, Anna has a dial gauge. Weighted. All right, we've got one weighted, one dial. That's a good question to ask. Dial. Okay. We've got quite a few gauges.
For all of you that have a dial gauge, it is recommended that these be tested once a year. And now is a great time to have that done. Mary Beth and I both in our counties have the equipment from Presto to actually test this for accuracy. There's no charge to you at all. So if you want to have your pressure dial gauge, can't even think for a minute, tested, then I think Mary Beth's got a day assigned in Blount County that you can bring it by. In Sevier County, I don't have that planned as such, but you can just call me and make an appointment. It only takes about, 15, 20 minutes. It's a very quick process, but it's very important because you want it to be accurate to make sure that your food is canned safely. So every year, have that done. And like I say, now in the spring's a good time to have that done. And if they're off like 2 pounds of pressure, typically you can buy new dial gauges. But anyway, that's a service that we offer. If it's new, do you need to get it tested? Mary Beth, do you want to respond to that? I have seen new ones.
Yes. The answer is
be tested.
Yep.
I would think they wouldn't, but I have.
You do need to test it if it's new because it had been moved around, shifted around. It had been, you don't know in the box when it was being transported. So you absolutely should have your gauge tested prior to first use. Good question.
And if you're not in Blount or Sevier, another county, all the county extension offices offer that service. So just contact them and ask if you can have that done, and it's free. Okay, shall I move on, Mary Beth? Thank you. Okay. You may ask, well, what's the difference in the two, weighted versus dial? The weighted, as I mentioned, it jiggles. To me, I like the dial gauge better because I'm really going to have to listen to the jiggle to make sure it's accurate and how fast it's going, whatever the manufacturer book says. And to me, that's harder than just reading a dial, reading a number. And also at higher altitudes, like if you're above 2,000 feet, they recommend to add an extra pound of pressure. Well, you can't really do that with a weighted gauge because each of those little bands is 5 pounds. So you have to go up 5 more pounds. So it's just a little more difficult. With a dial gauge, though, as you can see, we can always watch the number, watch how constant the pressure is. And as we just mentioned, it can be checked for accuracy. Weighted gauge, we don't do that. Okay. You may say, well, I have a small pressure cooker. Can I use that? That is not recommended to be used for canning. First of all, it's typically too small. It needs to hold at least 4-quart jars. Also, there's not a lot of room because it is small for the space between the jars. So you're not getting a lot of that, the processing going on, the temperature there. So they need to have space between the jars. So, and also with these, typically they're thinner than a canner. So the time it takes to heat up the water, to cool down the pressure and all that is different than in a canner. So it could be that you underprocess something and it wouldn't be safe. So it's really not recommended to use a small pressure cooker. That's not the same thing as a pressure canner because these use less water than a pressure canner. So the product would not be the same. Okay. I'm going to get into actually showing you how it works in a few minutes, but there's 2 serious errors that typically occur with pressure canning. Number 1 is the altitude. Now, pressure canners are very safe to use now, but these errors are something to think about. Their altitude. Here in Sevier County, at our office, we're 1,000 feet, but you may live in a mountain in Gatlinburg or another county where it's higher. So know kind of where you are. The recipes that you see, a good research-based recipe book will have information about altitude canning, but these recipes are typically done at 1,000 feet, okay, above sea level. So if it was above 2,000, you would have to add another pound of pressure. I think this next slide shows that, if I go the right direction. Yeah, so that can make a difference because what happens, the higher we get, the lower temperature water boils. So that affects our processing. So we have to add more pressure. The same amount of time as processing, but we have to add a little bit more pressure the higher we go in altitude. Okay, so you may want to think about where you live. The next thing, I don't have a slide of, another mistake that people often make in pressure canning, I'm going to go over this in a few minutes, is as they're building pressure in their canner, they do not let steam escape for 10 minutes. And I'm going to cover that in a few minutes because it gets kind of hard. if you're if you're busy. Okay, we're going to talk about filling jars right now, and I'm going to call on Mary Beth in just a few minutes to show some videos. But I wanted just to quickly try to show you some things. Obviously, you know, we have pint jars, and the bigger jars are your quart jars. Okay, and I think equipment that we're going to be using. I think I'll let you show the video first now, Mary Beth, filling the jars, and then I'll talk about it a little bit.
All right, let me share screen here.
And I'm doing carrots because, as Mary Beth said, there's not a lot that's in season this time of year, and green beans are pretty expensive. So it's really basically the same process. But anyway.
You see the video?
Yes.
All right, and then if any of you guys, once I start playing, if you give me a thumbs up that you can hear it, that'll make me feel better.
As you can see, I cooked the carrots. We're doing a hot pack, and it said to put the carrots in the pot, bring it to a boil, and then let it simmer, turn it down, and let it simmer for 5 minutes. And I have done that. So I'm going to bring my carrots over here close to me so I'll be able to fill the jars. Let's come back over to the stove just for 1 minute and look at a few things. I have my jars in the oven at preheat at 170. That's just the preheat setting because I want to keep the jars warm, not be cold when I put hot liquid in. And you can see them just laid in the oven like that on the preheat setting. And then I have my jars simmering just on low. These are the flats for the jars. Notice the rubber part is up because I want to get that rubber part warm so it will adhere to the jar and make that a little bit pliable. So I'm just letting them simmer while I fill the jars. So let's get ready to fill a jar. I'm going to take the jar out of the oven. Notice I'm using tongs that are rubber at the end because I don't want to crack or nick my jar. So I'm just going to slide one of these tongs inside the jar opening and bring it to an area. Like I have a piece of wood, a chopping board, and a towel here. So it's not like hot against a real cold surface. You don't want to, there again, crack that warm jar. Always need a funnel. Makes life easy when you're canning. So actually I'm going to take my hot carrots and fill my jar. And because I cooked these carrots ahead of time, that's going to help a little bit as far as getting more in the jar because a little bit of shrinking took place with the cooking process. So I'm filling the jar. Then we do the same thing here with green beans. If you were doing green beans, we call that a hot pack. Okay, I'm going to have to kind of rearrange my carrots here. And I want to have an inch headspace, so I think I've got a little too many carrots. And sometimes that does happen when you're filling the jars. You also need to add your liquid. And the beauty of this, we have this good hot liquid that all the nutrients from the carrots are in this liquid, so I'm adding it to my jar. And let's see if I have an inch. An inch headspace is the distance from your liquid or your food to the very top of the jar. So we can actually measure this. Or this is a great tool to have with your canning. This space is actually an inch. And these little notches each represent 1/4 of an inch. So the first notch is 1/4 of an inch, the second's 1/2. But I want an inch. So I can actually put this in the jar and see if I have an inch. And I believe I do. I can almost put a little more liquid in, just a tad, to cover my carrots. Okay, let's see how we did there. Okay, I still could put a little more liquid. This is where it takes a little more time, and of course, the more jars you do, the more you kind of get what it's going to look like. If I went over an inch, that may not be too bad, just depending upon how much. You don't want a lot of liquid because that could affect the processing. You may lose some liquid in your jar. Okay, I have an inch here. The next step I'm going to do is use this and get all the bubbles out. And you actually just put this in the side and bring it forward. And you do that all the way around. So after you've gotten the bubbles out, you want to make sure you get any liquid that was left on top of the lid. So I'm going to just wipe that off because any liquid or food particles would prevent your lid, your flat, from adhesing to the jar. Remember our little jar of simmering water, warm? I'm just going to take, this is a wonderful tool with canning. It has a magnetic end. So I'm going to take this, put it down in the water, and that pulls up the lid, the flat. And I'm just going to tilt that to get excess water off. I'm just going to grab the outside of it. I don't want to touch this rubber part. And just lay it on top. Then take your ring, hold the flat in place lightly with a couple of fingers, and take your ring and just turn it till it's just finger tight. You don't want to screw it real tight because actually we're going to have some air that comes out. So we want to make sure that we don't do it too tight. Okay? The next step that we're going to do is to take this and put it in our jar. I don't want to tilt this either. I want to keep it just straight up and keep it level. We're actually going to put it into our pressure canner. If you want to look at this, I have about 2.5 inches of water in the bottom. I have it on low, just kind of warm water, and I'm going to be placing my jars all the way around. I'm going to try to leave a little distance, with a little space between each jar. I really don't want the jars touching because I want the processing to take place all around the jars. So I'm actually going to be filling this up, and we'll show you that in just a few minutes. Okay, thank you. You can tell that was not Food Network production. I wanted to share, I was telling Mary Beth, I had to wear a mask and one of my coworkers had to wear a mask because we were kind of close. And I told her, don't show my face, I have a mask on, but it sounds like I'm doing heavy breathing with that mask on. So, and the oven's kind of dirty at the bottom, so I apologize for that. But hopefully you kind of got a picture of what's going on. Notice we have about 3 inches of water in the bottom of our pressure canner to begin with. And our our jars are actually canning jars. You don't want to use mayonnaise jars or peanut butter jars, jars that are specifically made for canning. You can use jars that you found at a yard sale, but make sure they're not nicked anywhere. Check them out really good before you use them. Notice as far as pre-sterilizing the jar with water bath or pressure canning, if they're going to be processed for 10 minutes or more, you don't have to pre-sterilize them in a hot water bath. Mary Beth will be showing you how to do that because hers won't process as long as mine. I'm doing carrots, and I apologize we don't have the recipe in front of you, but it's kind of like hot pack with green beans. You put the beans in the water and you bring it to a boil for about 5 minutes, and then you're able to can. So like I said, I'm doing carrots. I lost my train of thought right there. But anyway.
A question.
Yes, go ahead.
So the question is about specifically plastic funnel versus metal funnel, but in general, why do we use plastic?
Why do we use plastic? So we'll not nick the jar. Yeah, because sometimes your knives and your metal can nick it. That's the same thing we were talking about with the Oh, great. Hold on. Where we debubbled it, the plastic piece.
The wand. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the wand that showed. Yeah. Oh, here it is. I'm sorry. This thing right here. Yeah. We actually put this in here to release air bubbles because we want to get the air out and get the bubbles out before we actually put it into processing. So that's how you can use that. Now that's a hot pack. A raw pack with green beans would be just to put raw beans in your jar and then add boiling water to the jar. Okay. So I actually have a raw pack here. Can you see those versus a hot pack?
Just hold them up a little more. Perfect.
Can you tell a difference? Look how loose this is. There's not as many beans in this one, but this one has more. So really a hot pack is preferred where you actually cook the beans in the liquid and it causes them to shrink. And typically the color and the quality is better. Okay. So the headspace is usually 1 inch to 1/2 inch with your vegetables. That's very important. The distance between the top of the food and the bottom of the flat. Okay. If you have less than 1 inch, as the air is driven out, some of that liquid may actually try to seep out underneath the lid here and it will not seal. If you had more than 1 inch headspace, then that's a lot more air and that could affect the processing. You may not be able to, it may be under processed because you didn't actually have what's called for. You know, I'll be honest, it's just a little bit difference. It's not a huge thing, but you know, a major difference could cause problems. And you can buy these little kits at Walmart or wherever. You want to make sure this is clean and not nicked, this rubber here, because it actually fits on the jar. Finger tight, not real hard, because that could cause your lid to buckle. So because air is actually going to be coming out. So just kind of finger tight. Any questions? Okay, we'll move on right quick. I'm just seeing the time, Mary Beth. We're going to have to hurry, aren't we? Okay, go ahead. So I've got them in the jar. I'm putting the lid on. And we're getting ready to process. So
You wanting to do waiting for steam video?
I'll just talk about this next step and then we'll do the steam. How about that? Okay. Once you've put the jars in your canner to about 3 inches, you're actually going to put the top on the canner and you're going to actually turn it to high, the control on high, okay? But we're going to make sure that this is uncovered, okay? Because we want to take all the steam out of that canner, because if we leave the air in there, that's going to affect the temperature of the processing. We got to get all the air out so we can get to that 240 degrees that's recommended. Do you need a rack in the canner? Yes, ma'am. And this one has a rack. Your canner should come with one. That's a great question. You don't want your jars to actually touch the bottom of the canner. So a rack, I have heard of using a towel, but a rack would be preferred if you could, okay? So we're gonna turn up on high and we're gonna watch for this steam to come out. So Mary Beth, show the steam. And I'm sorry we're having to kind of hurry through this, but we want to respect your time. And this steam, you'll see what it looks like, kind of a funnel. It's a strong steam. It has to do that for 10 minutes. And I'm just going to keep talking till you tell me to be quiet. The steam is still continuing to go, and you will see with the light there how it is coming out pretty forcefully. I'm letting that go for 10 minutes. Also notice the little pick cock thing here. I'm not sure the exact wording. I'll have to check on that. but that also is raised, and that's a good sign that actually we're getting air out of our canner so we can start the processing shortly. There again, you've got to make sure that you set some kind of timer because it sure is easy to get distracted, and we want to follow the time that is set with the research-based recipe. As you notice, this is a dial gauge. This is a fairly new canner, several years old. That's something to think about too when you're buying
Stop it, Mary Beth.
your canner.
Okay, because I've really kind of covered that. I just wanted you to see what the steam looks like. And notice the top there. You want to stop sharing? It's called a vent lock, and it will come up, okay? Once it has actually done that for 10 minutes, and there again, you need to invest in a kitchen timer, you're actually going to you're going to cover up that steam, okay? You're going to cover up your steam with your weight gauge. It's not, you just cover that up, and then you're going to start your processing time, okay? You've got it on high, and you're going to actually see this little dial gauge will start to increase. When it gets to 8, you need to probably turn that down a little bit lower, your temperature setting, the knob on your stove, on your burner, because you don't want it to go past 11. The recipe says to process at 11 pounds pressure for 25 minutes, okay? So it'll start kind of going fast, but then turn that down. And you want it to go to 11 and stay there, okay? When it gets to 11, that's when you need to start timing it. If it says 25 minutes, when it gets to 11, that's when you start. So you need your timer. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I did this in the kitchen, and we were kind of doing other things. I probably should have paid a little more attention. And it got up to 14. So I thought, oh no. So I was trying to regulate it a little bit. Everything's sealed, but can you see this jar of carrots? Do you notice anything about it? You think it's more than an inch headspace? Can you tell? Actually, it is. As that pressure gets higher, you have the chance of more liquid coming out of your jars, okay? So that's why you want to try to keep it at 11. If it goes down below 11, then you're under processing. So you need to get it back up to 11 and start your time all over again, okay? So that's where it kind of, you can't just go watch TV or talk to your best friend on your cell phone. You really got to kind of pay attention to what you're doing. Okay, so let's say 25 minutes has passed, it's over. Do you have another video there?
I'm going to put steam for canners on.
Sorry, what?
Steam from canners.
Okay, we've already done that one.
Putting jars on the table?
Yes.
All right.
So.
Yeah. Okay, so the process.
What time is it, Mary Beth? Let's see.
8:09 or 8:06.
Okay, let me just talk it. Is that okay? Or what do you think?
It's 1 minute.
Okay, we can do 1 minute.
Yeah.
I'll probably.
The processing time is over. I have now finished, so I've taken the lid off, and I'm going to take the jars out of the hot water. And in doing that, you just lift your can directly up, lift your jar up, and put it on a surface, like of the towel or a wooden cutting board, somewhere where it won't be like cold or plastic mat. So we're going to set that down, and we're just going to let it sit there. I am going to leave space in between the jars as I set these down because we want these to cool. Actually, they are still processing as we take them out of the canner. So you do not want to force cool them. You do not want to take a cloth and get the moisture off the top. Just let them sit for 12 to 24 hours. And at that point, they should be sealed.
Everybody
Thank you.
wants to take the liquid off. I have had my husband, who just walked behind me, take a little paper towel and just lay it on top to get the liquid off And you should see my reaction. Get out of there.
Okay, thank you, Mary Beth. And I'll be honest, I apologize. I should have said something before we got to that particular slide. Let's go in reverse for just a minute. Okay, you've processed it. It's been 11 pounds pressure on your dial gauge for 25 minutes. Okay, the time is up. What you're going to do next is very important. You're going to actually turn that knob on your oven to off. You don't want any more heat on it. But then you're actually going to leave your weight on that little port there, and you're going to wait till this goes down to 0, that your pressure dial goes down to 0. At that point is when you take this off, and this little vent lock should be down. That means it's depressurized. It's down, okay? Very important safety. You never want to open a pressure canner while the pressure is still on. So it's still processing. All that's in the research with the timing. So turn off your burner, make sure it's at 0, wait 10 minutes, and then take this off. And then wait another 10 minutes before you actually take the lid off. So see, that's why Mary Beth said it takes a little bit of time. Very important though, okay? And then after all that, then you take the jars out. There again, research-based books will tell you this information, or your canner should have that information too. So let's say we put the jars out. It should seal 12 to 24 hours. And can you hear that? Obviously, that one's not sealed. I just put the lid on. And if they're sealed, you're not going to hear that sound. You're going to feel it concave. Let's say, well, this one didn't seal and it's been 24 hours. What can I do? You can actually put that in the refrigerator or in the freezer. And if you put it in the refrigerator, go ahead and, cook it and eat it. So that's an option. Another thing I meant to show you right quick, I had more carrots than I had jars for. So I ended up taking some of those carrots and I froze them. So, you can always freeze leftovers too that you're not canning. But make sure they have sealed. If they haven't, then you can put them in the refrigerator or your freezer.
Linda, we had a question.
Okay.
So the question was, so you don't cover the jars with water on them?
Right. That is only in hot water bath, and Mary Beth will be showing you. And that's kind of in your mind. If you're taking a bath, you fill it up with water. But with pressure canning, it's only 3 inches, usually 2 to 3 inches. Great question. So the jars are not covered. Great question. So I feel like we just kind of did this very quickly, but I hope it kind of gave you a good overview. We talked a little bit about salt and all. I'll be honest, they recommend a lot of times if you're going to be seasoning your vegetables, season them after they're canned when you're actually cooking them and preparing them to eat, because seasonings the flavor can get lost in the heating process. So it can change the taste. So do your seasoning afterwards. People are liking roasted vegetables now. I actually took my canned carrots, and like Mary Beth said, you can boil them for 10 minutes, or I kind of put them in the microwave for 5 minutes, got them real good and hot. But I actually put them in a roasting pan and roasted them. So you can still take your canned vegetables and use them for roasting or soups or whatever. So that's just a good thing to have on hand.
Do you have another question?
Yes.
Can you stack your jars if you have multiple small jars?
There are canners for that are made for that. I've never used that, to be honest with you. You'd have to have some kind of rack in between. Is that right, Mary Beth?
Yes, and I've seen them, but I've never canned with them before.
I haven't either.
It's twice, there's 2 racks to it. And it's very tall. Those are ones you definitely don't want to be using. Did you talk about glass top stoves?
No, thank you.
Okay.
These canners are really too heavy for glass top stoves. They could crack them. Glass top burners, they could crack them. But also typically their heat is not as consistent as regular burners. So it's recommended not to use that on glass top stoves. But some manufacturers that make those now say that you can. So just check and see where your stove was manufactured. Also, I just saw this past week that Presto is actually making one that can be used on glass top burners, but they're out of stock. So, but you can look at the Presto site or email Mary Beth or I, and we can give you that information. So they're calling them an induction type of canner. So they're making some for that.
We have another question. So can you please clarify the difference between a pressure cooker and a pressure canner, as well as, is there a particular brand that if someone were to go and purchase one that you would recommend?
Okay, pressure cooker is small, okay? It's not for canning. It's a thin-walled. It doesn't have all the things on the top that the pressure canner has on top. So it's not recommended because of its size. Also, it usually takes more water, and it's just a lot of differences in getting that water up to boiling, the steam, and you know, deep compressorizing. So it's not used for canning. I don't know if that's answering your question or not.
So you want to get a pressure canner.
A pressure canner, and I have used Presto. I guess that's what you have a thing, Mary Beth, you want to share? I don't really know to recommend one over another.
The American one, a lot of people use.
Yeah. Now there is, I think it's the American one that has a weighted gauge and a pressure, a dial gauge. It has both.
All American.
All American.
All American Presto, and I feel like there's one more that we see a lot. Presto is going to be your most popular that you see out and about. I don't know of any particular brands that you would want to stay away from. But I think there's one more. So while you're talking, I'm going to try and find that third brand that I often see. But All American and Presto are going to be your top ones.
The size that I have is a 16 quart that you can put like 8 to 9 pints in, which is, you know, fine for me, and fine, I think, for most canners. Now, you see some people advertise these multi-cookers for canning. USDA is not recommending those because of just the research. Sometimes the jars are on their side. They're too close together. There's not enough space in between the jars. Also, the boiling, they can't tell if it's a steady type boil to build up that pressure, if the pressure is consistent. So, I would stay away from those, or really talk to the manufacturer about that if it says it does. But what I've read, USDA is not really recommending those at this time. Dry canning is something we've been hearing about. That is not recommended also. It may be dry, but actually what happens when that food is stored is releasing moisture, which can lead to spoilage and, you know, the harmful organisms that we don't want. So you really need that heat and the liquid for the processing, the water for that. So recommended, it's not safe dry canning.
And you said multi-cookers too, right?
Right.
They're not recommended.
They're not recommended either at this point.
Yeah. There's been some steamers. And so the reason why multi-cookers are not recommended right now, and the same with the steamers, is that you have to be able to see what's going on. You have to be able to have some control. They're more digital. You can't really tell if the steam is coming up at a certain consistency. You can't see a dial gauge to see if your dial is, the pressure is where it needs to be. You need to be able to see these things, visually see them. So until the multi-cooker or the steamers come out with, I don't know, a window or something, they're not recommended.
They're not able to do that test that you mentioned the very first of class, Mary Beth, the research USDA with that thermometer upright in the jar. So that's why they're not recommending those. Mary Beth and I have access to a state specialist with the University of Tennessee with food preservation. So if there are questions that pop in your head that we don't know, we can always go to her with those questions, and we'll be happy to do that, because I know canning is a big interest, and we're glad of that. I think that's a great thing. and there's a lot of new stuff coming out. Don't always just trust Facebook and the internet. You know.
I didn't put in the chat box the 3 ones when I'm testing canner lids. The 3 brands is Cuisinart. Cuisinart, I think that's how you say it. But I have not seen a lot of them, and I don't know what the history is on how long they've been making canners for. The most we see, and the older ones that have held up for a long period, are the Presto and the All American. The number 1 rule, and you'll see the Prestos and All Americans that are really, really old, like by 50 years or 60 years. Those canners are, you'll see the people that have had them, they still have their manufacturer's book, because we cannot emphasize enough, do not get rid of your manufacturer's book. Keep it with the unit, because when you have questions, our answer is going to always be refer to your manufacturer's booklet. So make sure you don't get rid of that.
Good point. Thank you. Any other questions that you have? Or so remember, test question: if you're going to can green beans, do you use a pressure canner or a hot water bath? So if you think it's a pressure canner, yes or no, put that in the chat box. For green beans, do you use a pressure canner, yes or no? I think we had a question while I asked that.
Yes, and there's an older brand named Mirror. What was your question? Repeat your question again.
If you're going to can green beans, do you use a pressure canner, yes or no? Okay.
We've had a couple yeses and 1 or 2 no's.
Okay. The answer is yes, pressure canner. Pressure canners are for all vegetables. If you're just canning vegetables, you have to use the pressure canner, because it has to get up to that 240 degrees to kill that botulism. Okay, pressure canner is for all vegetables, for your soups, and your meats, any meat. And if you're doing soup, typically you put half of the jar has the vegetables and stuff in it, and then you fill up the rest of the jar with liquid. And of course, there's recipes for that, but you want to do like half and then add the liquid. Always, no other way to do vegetables. So don't think you can take Mary Beth's class on hot water bath and do green beans. It's dangerous. You can get very, very sick.
There is one exception. And although in the culinary world, it is a vegetable, it is actually the fruit of the plant. And I would like you to see if you know what it is. Go ahead and put in the chat if you know the one vegetable that you can water bath can.
Oh my goodness. Oh, I've heard about that. Okay.
In the culinary world, it is considered a vegetable. In the nutrient world, it's considered a vegetable. But in the biology world, it is considered the fruit of the plant.
Good question.
Got a couple people answering. Let's see. I'm going to a few more, see if you know. You guys got it right. Tomato. Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't mention that. You could really do that both ways, and Mary Beth will talk about that in her.
Yeah, we're going to actually water bath can them. The reason for that is it's very high in acid, and actually, if you do water bath can them, to ensure that it's at 5% acidity, you do have to add an acid to your jar. So yes, we can water bath tomatoes. For those of you guys who knew that, good job. That's the only vegetable that you can water bath.
Right. And I had a question about potatoes. We do have a recipe for pressure canning potatoes, and it is 35 minutes, but we could send you that recipe, or you could go to that website that Mary Beth shared. But I'll be honest, if there's one item that you need a recipe for and you just don't know where to go, contact us. We can send you that one recipe. I'd rather ask, be safe than sorry.
Linda and I are family consumer science agents, and so if you think about in the realm of home economics, we do a lot of things in the world. And we'll be doing financing one time and, one moment, or we'll be doing parenting classes another. And then I'll get a call on, can you give me a recipe on a delicious okra canning recipe? And I always get excited because it's fun. This stuff's really, really fun to do. So we welcome your calls if you want a good recipe on something. So I do want to remind you, our next class is April. I'm going to put it in the chat box. Again, it's from 7:30 to 8:30. We do make it so late to really accommodate those that are working. Whoops. Hold on, I got to send it to everybody. April 6th. p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Okay, so it is April. Think about what might be in season in April, and go ahead and put in the chat box, what do you want me to can? It's got to be a jam or a jelly or a marmalade.
And we need to ask them a question about tonight too, Mary Beth.
Mm-hmm.
Do that next.
Yes.
Okay.
So what do you want me to can live? Any interest? Jams, jelly, or a marmalade? A marmalade's going to have fruit rind in it. Preserves is a whole fruits are in there. Jams have little bits and pieces of fruit, and jellies have no pieces of fruit. Reduced sugar, strawberry, jams. That's the easiest. Preserves, jams. Do you guys have a particular, I see a lot of strawberry jams. Those that have put preserves and jams, do you have a specific fruit that you want me to do?
That would be a good strawberry time.
I know, I think it would be peach preserves. I love it when the peach truck comes. We do any type of marmalade or strawberry, blueberry, whatever's in season. Blueberry, that would be great. Muscadine jelly, that's popular. Blueberry. Oh, that's a great question. I actually don't know the answer to that. Bananas. I'm going to look real quick.
Yeah, I can look.
Okay.
I don't see for, you can only freeze or dry bananas. Freeze or dry them.
That was a great question. Blackberry jam. Ooh, that'll be good too. I have a really delicious strawberry. It's called a strawberry lemonade marmalade. And strawberry jam is very tart. It's delicious, but it's not tart. It's sweet. Super, super sweet. And so I have used the strawberry lemonade marmalade. It does have a little bit of lemon juice and a little bit of lemon rind in it. It does not taste like lemonade. In fact, if you were having it, you would think it was just strawberry jam. But I think the lemon brings out this beautiful color, and the flavor it almost cuts down on that sweetness just a tad. So maybe I'll make that. That's one of my favorite ones. If I'm going to do strawberry jam, that's the one I make.
Okay, there's a comment about monkey butter with pineapple and banana. I have not seen that, but thinking about that, banana is not to be canned. So I would like to see the source of that recipe. That may be something you could, I don't know, freeze or something, but and it may be a good research-based recipe. I can't find anything here on that in the book that I have. So check out your sources but anyway, just think about that, what you're canning. So that may be a good thing if we knew the source of it. We want to make sure it's research-based.
Oh, are you talking about the person, I think it was Christine, who put the monkey bread with pineapple and banana?
Is it bread or butter?
Monkey butter with pineapple and banana. Are you talking about recipes in a jar, or are you talking about something that's canned? Canned, okay. I'm looking it up just to see.
How can you get a recipe research? I would just go to these research based sites and enter that recipe and see what shows up. The National Center for Home and Food Preservation, you can actually send an email to someone, or there again, our state specialist. But if it's not listed or something really similar to it, then I would suggest probably not doing it.
Yeah, so I looked
No.
it up. It's bananas, crushed pineapple, coconut sugar, lemon juice, pectin. But it is not listed on National Food Preservation. It's not listed in So Easy to Preserve. And I'm looking real quick for fresh preserve.
Somebody's ready to go. We probably ought to do our evaluation question right quick, but feel free to email us right quick. Email us anytime if you do have questions. Okay, we want you to answer this for our evaluation. Yes or no? Do you feel more confident that you could use the pressure canner in canning now? I know the majority of you've never canned before initially, but do you feel like you're a little bit more confident and could perhaps do that? Could probably do that. If you could say yes or no, we would like to have your answers. And Mary Beth's kind of looking at that. Yes or no, just be honest. And I'd like for everybody to respond, if you would, please. That would be helpful to us. Yes or no, you feel more confident. Has everybody responded, Mary Beth? I appreciate Mary Beth being Vanna here and figuring all this out.
Yes, everyone has.
All right, great. Okay. Any other question you want to ask Mary Beth?
I don't. I think it was a wonderful class, and I'm excited to
I do too.
I really am. I mean, next month.
We're talking at the same time. I just want to say thank you, everybody, for staying with us this long and at nighttime, and you had great questions. Like I say, we're open for if you need any help in the future. So thank you for joining us, and we look forward to the next class.
And don't forget to get your pressure canner dial gauge tested.
Yes.
All right, take care.
Thank you. Have a good rest of the week.
You're welcome.
Good night.